You're not worthy of our family name. Don't embarrass us at Michael's wedding. The words sliced through the mahogany conference room like a blade designed for maximum damage, each syllable calculated to wound deeper than the last. Robert Hayes delivered this verdict with the casual cruelty of a man accustomed to wielding power over those he considered beneath him, his voice carrying the dismissive authority that had intimidated business rivals and family members alike for over a decade. The cancellation letter slid across the polished boardroom table with deliberate precision, landing directly in front of me while the golden Arizona sunset painted the floor-to-ceiling windows of his investment firm's 32nd floor offices. The document was typed on official letterhead, bearing the seal of respectability that masked its true purpose as an instrument of calculated humiliation. My eyes scanned the formal language that transformed months of my generous planning and financial contributions into evidence of my unworthiness to participate in the celebration I had made possible. The final line struck with particular venom. Wedding deposit of $35,000 retained per original agreement. Robert had systematically erased me from his brother's wedding, while ensuring my money remained trapped within their family celebration, creating a financial prison that would fund my own exclusion. The conference room had witnessed countless hostile takeovers during Robert's career as a senior investment banker, but none quite like this domestic coup, where he positioned himself as protector of family dignity while orchestrating my social execution. His mahogany desk displayed the typical power symbols of his profession: crystal awards recognizing deal-making excellence, photographs with political figures whose campaigns he had funded, and leather-bound reports documenting acquisitions that had shaped Arizona's economic landscape. Yet today, these symbols of professional achievement served as props for personal betrayal that revealed the true character hiding beneath his carefully constructed public image. Michael and Jessica deserve a celebration focused on their love, not complicated by family tensions that might overshadow their special day, Robert continued, his tone suggesting noble sacrifice rather than acknowledging the systematic manipulation he had orchestrated over the previous 6 months. Your inability to understand appropriate boundaries in family relationships has created an atmosphere that could damage what should be the happiest moment of their lives. His reframing of my legitimate involvement in wedding planning as boundary violations demonstrated the psychological manipulation tactics that had enabled him to control narratives throughout our 8-year marriage. The irony was crushing in its completeness. I had spent 11 months researching venues, coordinating vendors, and managing every detail that would transform Michael and Jessica's modest celebration dreams into the luxury mountain resort wedding they could never have afforded on their combined teacher salaries. My involvement had been requested, encouraged, and praised by every family member who recognized that my event planning expertise and financial resources represented their only pathway to the sophisticated celebration they desperately wanted but lacked the means to achieve independently. Robert's dismissal of this extensive contribution as inappropriate boundary crossing revealed how completely he had rewritten history to justify theft that would have impressed professional con artists. The man who had benefited from my business acumen throughout our marriage now painted my competence as problematic interference that required family protection rather than recognition and gratitude. His ability to transform my generosity into evidence of character defects suggested sociopathic-level manipulation that I was only beginning to recognize despite years of exposure to his increasingly controlling behavior. The wedding planning process had consumed nearly a year of my life, during which I had researched 17 different venue options before identifying Sunset Ridge Resort as the perfect location for Michael and Jessica's celebration. The property offered everything they had described in their wishful conversations about impossible dreams: panoramic mountain views, luxury accommodations for out-of-town guests, and exclusive access to wedding facilities that typically hosted celebrities and political figures. The total cost exceeded $90,000, representing more than triple their combined annual salaries. Yet, I had embraced the financial responsibility because I believed family celebrations deserved investment that created lasting memories. My notebooks contained hundreds of pages documenting vendor research, menu tastings, floral arrangements, and coordination details that had occupied evenings and weekends for months while Robert pursued business deals that required extensive travel and networking obligations. I had approached wedding planning with the same systematic thoroughness that characterized my approach to business challenges, creating spreadsheets, timelines, and backup plans that ensured every element would function seamlessly on Michael and Jessica's special day. The depth of my preparation made Robert's characterization of my involvement as boundary violations particularly insulting, given that his own contribution had been limited to occasional approving nods and expressions of gratitude that now appeared calculated rather than genuine. If you're already feeling the rage building for Victoria and want to see how she handles this betrayal, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories about women who discover their true power when others underestimate them. The meeting concluded with Robert's instructions about maintaining family harmony by accepting exclusion gracefully while continuing to fund celebration arrangements that had been finalized without my input or consent. His expectation that I would submit to financial manipulation while expressing gratitude for the privilege revealed assumptions about my character that were both insulting and fundamentally mistaken. The quiet woman he had married 8 years earlier was discovering reserves of strength and strategic thinking that domestic tranquility had never required, though the full scope of these capabilities would remain hidden until circumstances demanded their deployment. Walking through the marble lobby of Robert's office building, I processed the devastating recognition that my husband viewed me as a renewable financial resource rather than a human being deserving of basic respect and consideration. The elevator descent from his 32nd floor power base felt symbolic of my social status within relationships that had always functioned on hierarchical rather than egalitarian principles. Yet something about this particular betrayal felt different from previous instances of dismissive treatment, carrying a finality that suggested fundamental changes in how I understood marriage, family loyalty, and personal worth. The drive home through Scottsdale's affluent neighborhoods provided thinking space that had become increasingly rare during months of wedding planning obligations and Robert's escalating demands for my attention to his business networking requirements. Our Mediterranean-style home sat on 2 acres of professionally landscaped desert gardens, representing the lifestyle achievements that Robert regularly credited to his business success, while ignoring my substantial financial contributions to our shared prosperity. The house had always felt like his domain, rather than our mutual sanctuary, though I was only beginning to recognize how completely domestic arrangements reflected power dynamics that favored his comfort over my autonomy. That evening brought the first phone call that would begin illuminating the web of deception surrounding Michael's wedding planning. Amanda Foster, the professional wedding coordinator Robert had hired to manage final arrangements, contacted me with what she described as clarification requests about vendor payments and timeline coordination. Her voice carried the strained politeness of someone navigating diplomatic quicksand while attempting to extract information without revealing the full scope of her confusion about family dynamics she obviously did not understand. Mrs. Hayes, I hope you'll forgive the intrusion, but I'm receiving conflicting instructions about several important wedding details that require immediate resolution. Amanda began with the careful professionalism that event planners develop when managing family crises that threaten to destroy celebrations months in the making. Your husband indicated that you would no longer be involved in planning decisions. Yet, many of our vendor contracts specifically name you as the primary contact for coordination and payments. The revelation that Robert had attempted to remove me from vendor communications while preserving my financial obligations represented a new level of manipulation that left me momentarily speechless. His systematic effort to erase my involvement while maintaining access to my checkbook demonstrated planning that extended far beyond spontaneous family diplomacy or wedding stress management. This was calculated exclusion designed to maximize my humiliation while ensuring my continued funding of celebrations that would proceed according to his preferences, rather than collaborative family decision-making. Amanda's confusion stemmed from practical realities that Robert had apparently failed to consider while orchestrating my social assassination. Every major vendor contract bore my signature as the financial guarantor. My credit card secured all deposits, and my contact information served as the primary communication channel for coordination that had required hundreds of phone calls and email exchanges over the previous months. Robert's attempt to assume control over arrangements I had funded and managed revealed both his arrogance and his fundamental ignorance about the practical complexities of event coordination at this scale. Amanda, I think there may have been some miscommunication about my role in Michael and Jessica's wedding planning, I replied, with diplomatic restraint while processing the implications of what she had revealed about Robert's behind-the-scenes manipulation. Could you clarify exactly what instructions my husband provided about changes to our existing arrangements? My question was designed to extract information about the scope of his interference while maintaining professional relationships that might become crucial if this situation escalated beyond family diplomacy into legal territory, requiring documentation and witness testimony. Her explanation revealed the systematic nature of Robert's deception and the extent to which he had misrepresented both my consent and his authority over arrangements he had not funded or planned. According to Amanda, Robert had contacted every major vendor, claiming that family circumstances required transferring all coordination responsibilities to him while maintaining existing financial arrangements exactly as originally established. He had presented these changes as mutual decisions that reflected my desire to reduce involvement, rather than acknowledging his unilateral decision to exclude me from celebrations I had made possible through extensive personal and financial investment. The sophistication of his manipulation extended beyond simple exclusion into complex deception that required coordinating lies across multiple vendors and family members, while maintaining plausible deniability about his true motivations. Robert had spent weeks crafting a narrative that positioned my removal as evidence of his protective leadership, rather than recognizing it as calculated cruelty, designed to demonstrate his power over someone whose contributions he simultaneously demanded and dismissed. Most disturbing was Amanda's revelation that Robert had characterized my potential attendance as problematic for reasons related to my emotional stability and tendency toward inappropriate behavior at family gatherings. He had assassinated my character to justify exclusion while portraying himself as the reasonable family member, making difficult decisions to protect everyone else from my supposedly disruptive presence. The victim blaming reached impressive heights of psychological manipulation that suggested professional-level skill in narrative construction and reality distortion. Mrs. Hayes, I feel obligated to mention that these arrangements seem highly irregular, based on my professional experience coordinating family celebrations, Amanda said with growing discomfort evident in her voice. I've never encountered a situation where the primary financial contributor was excluded from planning decisions, while their funding remained required for vendor payments and contractual obligations. Even strangers recognized the ethical bankruptcy of what Robert had orchestrated, though their professional concerns would prove insufficient to prevent the systematic humiliation he had planned as my punishment for 8 years of financial independence that had threatened his assumptions about domestic hierarchy. The phone call with Amanda concluded with my promise to clarify family arrangements, while internally recognizing that Robert's manipulation had created situations requiring strategic rather than emotional responses. His underestimation of both my business acumen and my networking capabilities represented tactical errors that would prove costly once I fully understood the scope of resources available for addressing systematic betrayal that had crossed moral and possibly legal boundaries. Tuesday brought an unexpected visit to Sunset Ridge Resort, that would plant the first seeds of recognition about capabilities I possessed, but had never consciously acknowledged or exercised. Jessica had invited me to a final venue walkthrough. Apparently, unaware of Robert's systematic efforts to exclude me from wedding planning, or confused about the authority dynamics that had changed so dramatically over the previous week. Her excitement about showing me ceremony locations and reception arrangements carried genuine warmth that contrasted sharply with the calculated cruelty I had recently experienced from other family members. The drive up the mountain highway towards Sunset Ridge Resort provided breathtaking views of the Sonoran desert landscape that had initially attracted me to this venue as the perfect setting for Michael and Jessica's celebration. The resort's entrance featured natural stone gates that opened onto winding roads through pristine desert gardens leading to the main lodge, a structure that combined rustic elegance with luxury amenities in ways that justified its reputation as Arizona's premier wedding destination. The property represented everything I had hoped to provide for Michael and Jessica: beauty, sophistication, and exclusivity that would create memories lasting far beyond the celebration itself. Jessica's enthusiasm during our venue tour was infectious. Her joy in showing me ceremony sites and reception locations temporarily overshadowing the family drama that had dominated my thoughts for days. We walked through the mountain pavilion where she would exchange vows with panoramic valley views as her backdrop, examined reception spaces that could accommodate their guest list while maintaining intimate atmosphere, and discussed photography locations that would capture the natural beauty that made this venue worth the substantial investment required for exclusive access. Yet, something strange began happening during our walkthrough that I initially attributed to exceptional customer service rather than recognizing its true significance. Every staff member we encountered addressed me with unusual deference, their respect extending far beyond typical vendor politeness into genuine recognition that suggested familiarity with my identity and authority. The housekeeping supervisor paused her duties to greet me personally. The catering manager approached to confirm menu details with intimate knowledge of my preferences. And the grounds crew foreman asked about my satisfaction with recent landscaping improvements around the wedding pavilion. "The staff here really seems to know you well," Jessica observed with mild curiosity as we concluded our tour of ceremony locations. "I suppose they remember you from all the planning meetings and vendor coordination calls you've had over the past year." Her innocent explanation seemed reasonable enough, though something about the intensity and consistency of staff recognition felt disproportionate to normal vendor relationships, even after extensive planning collaboration. The restaurant manager's approach during our lunch meeting provided the most puzzling interaction of our visit. Rather than treating me as a customer or even a valued client, he addressed me with the careful professionalism typically reserved for individuals whose opinions carried weight extending far beyond single event coordination. His knowledge of my dietary preferences was remarkably detailed. His recommendations reflected intimate familiarity with my tastes and requirements, and his attention to our table exceeded normal hospitality standards, even for venues specializing in luxury service. "Ma'am, I wanted to personally ensure that your dining experience meets the standards you expect," he said, with respectful attention that seemed oddly formal for a routine venue visit. "Please let me know if there's anything about our service or facilities that requires adjustment or improvement." His use of "ma'am" carried genuine respect rather than perfunctory courtesy, while his concern about meeting my standards suggested accountability relationships I did not remember establishing during previous vendor negotiations. The lunch conversation with Jessica provided insights into family dynamics that Robert had carefully concealed while orchestrating my exclusion from wedding planning. According to her understanding, my financial contribution to their celebration was substantial, but not unprecedented, representing generous family support, rather than recognizing the complete funding that had actually made their dream wedding possible. Robert had apparently minimized my investment while maximizing his own leadership role, positioning himself as the primary decision maker while characterizing my involvement as helpful but secondary assistance. Michael and I are so grateful for all the support you and Robert have provided, Jessica said, with sincere appreciation that revealed how completely she had been misled about the financial realities underlying her wedding arrangements. Robert mentioned that you're helping with some of the costs while he handles the major expenses and coordination responsibilities. Her innocent misunderstanding of our respective contributions illustrated how systematically Robert had constructed narratives that enhanced his importance while diminishing my actual role in creating the celebration she was anticipating. The drive home from Sunset Ridge Resort left me with growing questions about staff interactions that had felt significant, though I could not yet articulate why their behavior seemed remarkable. The unusual deference suggested familiarity that extended beyond typical vendor relationships, while their knowledge of my preferences and concern about my satisfaction implied accountability structures I did not remember creating. These observations joined a growing list of anomalies surrounding wedding arrangements that had begun feeling orchestrated rather than organic, though the full scope of Robert's manipulation remained hidden beneath layers of careful deception. Wednesday evening brought the phone call that would begin illuminating the financial infrastructure underlying Michael and Jessica's wedding celebration. Daniel Rodriguez, operations director at Sunset Ridge Resort, contacted me about what he described as coordination concerns that required clarification from someone with decision-making authority over event planning and vendor management. His voice carried professional urgency that suggested complications extending beyond routine customer service issues or minor scheduling adjustments. Mrs. Hayes, I hope you'll forgive the direct contact, but I'm receiving conflicting instructions about your brother-in-law's wedding that seem to contradict our existing agreements and standard operational procedures. Daniel began with diplomatic language that barely concealed growing frustration with whatever confusion had developed around event coordination. Mr. Robert Hayes contacted our office, claiming authority to modify arrangements that our contracts specify require your approval for any significant changes. The revelation that Robert had attempted to override contractual agreements, bearing my signature, represented escalation in his manipulation that moved beyond family politics into potential fraud territory. His assumption that he could unilaterally modify legal agreements I had signed demonstrated both arrogance and ignorance about business practices that had protected my interests throughout years of event planning and vendor relationships. Daniel's professional concerns about contractual violations provided the first external validation that Robert's behavior had crossed ethical boundaries that extended beyond marriage counseling into legal territory requiring documentation and strategic response. Daniel's explanation of Robert's demands revealed the scope of control he was attempting to establish over arrangements he had neither funded nor planned. According to vendor contracts, significant changes to catering, facilities, or coordination required written authorization from the financial guarantor whose credit secured all deposits and ongoing obligations. Robert's verbal instructions to modify these arrangements without proper documentation represented violations of established procedures that protected both vendors and clients from unauthorized changes that could create financial or legal complications. Mr. Rodriguez, could you clarify exactly what modifications my husband requested and what documentation he provided to authorize these changes? I asked, while recognizing that his answer would determine whether Robert's manipulation had escalated into fraudulent misrepresentation that might require legal intervention rather than family diplomacy to resolve effectively. His response confirmed that Robert had provided no written authorization while demanding immediate implementation of changes that would transfer coordination authority to him while maintaining my financial obligations exactly as originally established. The systematic nature of his demands, combined with his inability to provide proper documentation, suggested deliberate deception rather than misunderstanding about proper procedures. Daniel's growing concerns about contractual compliance reflected professional standards that Robert had apparently assumed he could override through charm, intimidation, or simple assertion of masculine authority over arrangements that legal documents clearly designated as my responsibility. Most significantly, Daniel revealed information about Sunset Ridge Resort's operational structure that began illuminating why staff interactions during my venue visit had felt unusually deferential and personally informed. According to his explanation, all major vendor payments were processed through a parent company called Grandview Holdings, LLC, rather than being paid directly to individual service providers or facility management. This financial arrangement created coordination efficiencies and cost savings that benefited clients through simplified billing and unified customer service, though the specifics remained proprietary information that he could not discuss in detail during our phone conversation. The mention of Grandview Holdings, LLC triggered vague recognition that I could not immediately place, though something about that corporate name felt familiar in ways that suggested previous exposure I had forgotten or not properly processed at the time. My business files contained numerous vendor contracts and financial documents accumulated over years of event planning activities, and I made a mental note to review these materials for any previous references to this parent company that seemed to coordinate services across multiple hospitality and event planning vendors throughout Arizona. Mrs. Hayes, I want to emphasize that our primary concern is ensuring your satisfaction with all aspects of Michael and Jessica's wedding celebration. Daniel continued, with professional courtesy that carried subtle implications about authority relationships I did not fully understand. Any changes to existing arrangements should follow proper procedures to avoid complications that might affect the quality of service you expect from our organization. His emphasis on service you expect echoed the restaurant manager's earlier comments about meeting standards you expect, suggesting accountability structures that extended beyond normal customer service protocols. Thursday brought the discovery that would begin unraveling the carefully constructed illusion that had concealed the true scope of my business activities and professional influence. While organizing files for tax preparation, I encountered a manila folder labeled Grandview Holdings, LLC that contained corporate documents I had apparently filed away without recognizing their significance for wedding planning arrangements that were now creating family controversy and legal complications. The contents of this folder would have been unremarkable during routine business administration, yet they took on profound significance when considered alongside recent revelations about vendor payment structures and operational coordination that Daniel Rodriguez had mentioned during our phone conversation. Corporate filings showed Grandview Holdings, LLC, as an Arizona-based hospitality management company with extensive property holdings and service coordination responsibilities throughout the southwestern United States. The company's registered address matched my business office location, while the corporate officers listed included my maiden name as principal owner and primary decision maker. Financial documents revealed that Grandview Holdings, LLC, owned or managed 17 different hospitality properties across Arizona, New Mexico, and Nevada, including luxury resorts, boutique hotels, and exclusive event venues that served high-end clientele throughout the region. The revenue figures exceeded my conscious awareness of business success, suggesting either accounting errors or systematic underestimation of profits and growth that had occurred while I focused on daily operational challenges rather than comprehensive financial analysis. Most remarkable was the discovery that Sunset Ridge Resort was not simply a venue I had selected for Michael and Jessica's wedding, but rather a flagship property owned entirely by Grandview Holdings, LLC, and operated under my ultimate authority as principal corporate officer. The staff deference during my recent venue visit suddenly made perfect sense, as did Daniel Rodriguez's careful attention to my satisfaction and his concerns about proper authorization procedures for contractual modifications. I had not been treated as a valued customer, but rather as the owner whose decisions affected employment security and operational standards throughout the organization. The implications of this discovery were staggering and disorienting in ways that challenged my understanding of personal identity, professional capabilities, and family relationships that had been built on fundamentally inaccurate assumptions about my social and economic status. Robert's dismissive treatment of my business activities as small event planning now appeared laughably inadequate to describe hospitality empire that generated millions of dollars in annual revenue while employing hundreds of people across multiple states. His characterization of my contributions to Michael and Jessica's wedding as generous family assistants took on entirely different meaning when viewed through the lens of my actual ownership of every vendor, facility, and service provider involved in their celebration. The recognition that I had unconsciously built business empire while maintaining modest self-image as local event planner created cognitive dissonance that required fundamental reassessment of capabilities, achievements, and social position that I had systematically undervalued despite their obvious scope and success. Years of Robert's dismissive comments about my hobby business had apparently influenced my own perception of activities that represented sophisticated entrepreneurship and strategic growth rather than casual part-time interests that supplemented our household income. Friday morning brought a phone call from Sarah Johnson, corporate attorney specializing in hospitality law, who wanted to discuss concerns that had been raised about contract modifications and operational changes affecting Grandview Holdings LLC properties and subsidiaries. Her professional tone carried urgency that suggested complications requiring immediate attention from corporate leadership rather than routine legal maintenance that could be scheduled at my convenience. Victoria, I've received several inquiries this week about authorization procedures and decision-making authority related to your hospitality properties. Sarah began with the direct communication style that characterized our business relationship during the years she had provided legal counsel for corporate expansion and acquisition activities. There seems to be some confusion about who has authority to modify existing agreements and contractual obligations, particularly regarding Sunset Ridge Resort operations and client services. Her explanation revealed that Robert's attempts to override my contractual agreements had generated legal concerns beyond simple vendor confusion or family coordination challenges. Multiple service providers had contacted Sarah's office, seeking clarification about proper authorization procedures after receiving verbal instructions that contradicted written agreements and established corporate protocols. The pattern of inquiries suggested systematic attempts to circumvent legal structures that protected both Grandview Holdings LLC and its clients from unauthorized changes that could create liability or service complications. Sarah's legal analysis of the situation confirmed that Robert possessed no authority to modify agreements, bearing my signature, or to represent corporate interests in negotiations with vendors and service providers. His verbal instructions to various contractors represented potential contract interference that could result in legal action if his unauthorized demands caused financial losses or service disruptions for corporate clients or business partners. The sophistication of legal protections surrounding my business operations provided safeguards that Robert had apparently never bothered to understand, despite benefiting from their financial results throughout our marriage. Victoria, I need to ask directly whether you authorized your husband to represent corporate interests or modify existing contractual arrangements. Sarah continued with legal precision that required clear documentation of authority relationships for potential future proceedings. The inquiries I'm receiving suggest either miscommunication about his role or deliberate misrepresentation of authority that could have serious legal implications, depending on the scope and intent of his actions. My confirmation that Robert had acted without authorization while misrepresenting his authority to modify corporate agreements created legal record that might become crucial if his manipulation escalated beyond family conflict into business interference requiring court intervention. Sarah's documentation of unauthorized activity protected corporate interests while establishing foundation for potential legal action if Robert's behavior continued threatening business relationships or operational stability. The phone call concluded with Sarah's recommendation that I formally clarify authority structures with all vendors and service providers to prevent future confusion while protecting corporate interests from unauthorized interference. Her suggested approach would involve direct communication with all contractors, explaining proper authorization procedures, while emphasizing that only documented, written instructions bearing my signature carried legal authority for contractual modifications or operational changes. What would you do if you discovered your husband was trying to sabotage your business empire while stealing from your family? Let me know in the comments how you think Victoria should handle this betrayal. Saturday brought confrontation that had been building since Robert's initial manipulation became apparent through vendor concerns and legal complications that threatened business relationships I had spent years developing. His return from a week-long business conference in Denver provided the first opportunity for a direct discussion about his unauthorized interference with corporate operations and contractual agreements that had generated confusion among legal counsel and service providers throughout Arizona's hospitality industry. Robert entered our home that evening carrying aggressive defensiveness, characteristic of someone whose deception was beginning to unravel despite careful planning and execution. Instead of his typical casual greeting after business travel, he approached our conversation with preemptive accusations designed to position my legitimate concerns as unreasonable emotional reactions that revealed character flaws rather than recognizing them as appropriate responses to systematic manipulation and potential fraud. I understand you've been creating problems with Michael's wedding arrangements by confusing vendors and interfering with coordination, that I've been managing to protect you from unnecessary stress. He began with victim-blaming tactics that attempted to transform his unauthorized activity into evidence of my problematic behavior. Your inability to delegate responsibility and trust family members to handle important decisions has created complications that could ruin Michael and Jessica's celebration if you continue undermining my efforts to ensure everything proceeds smoothly. His characterization of my contractual enforcement and legal consultation as interference revealed how completely Robert had convinced himself that my business empire existed primarily to serve his convenience, rather than representing legitimate entrepreneurial achievement that deserved protection from unauthorized manipulation. His assumption that he could override legal agreements while characterizing my objections as emotional instability demonstrated psychological manipulation tactics that had apparently succeeded in controlling family narratives for years without my full recognition of their systematic nature. The confrontation escalated when I presented documentation about his unauthorized attempts to modify corporate agreements, while misrepresenting his authority to vendors and service providers throughout the hospitality network. His response revealed the extent to which he had planned to continue manipulation while maintaining plausible deniability about his true motivations and the scope of financial control he was attempting to establish over assets he had not created or contributed to developing. Victoria, you're overreacting to simple coordination efforts that were intended to reduce your involvement in stressful planning activities, Robert replied, with dismissive condescension that failed to address the legal implications of his unauthorized contract interference. Your tendency to micromanage business relationships and maintain excessive control over routine decisions has created unnecessary complications that reasonable people would handle through appropriate delegation and family cooperation. His persistent refusal to acknowledge fraudulent misrepresentation while characterizing my business protection as controlling behavior revealed moral confusion that made productive discussion impossible, while confirming that strategic rather than emotional responses would be required to address systematic manipulation that threatened corporate interests and family relationships simultaneously. The quiet woman he had dismissed and financially exploited was beginning to recognize resources and capabilities that domestic accommodation had never required, though the full scope of these assets would remain concealed until circumstances demanded their complete deployment. Robert's final threat during our Saturday evening confrontation provided the catalyst that would transform family conflict into corporate warfare, requiring all available resources and strategic advantages that years of business development had inadvertently prepared for exactly this type of systematic betrayal and attempted destruction. If you continue interfering with family decisions and creating problems for Michael's wedding coordination, I'll have no choice but to take steps that protect our marriage and my professional reputation from your increasingly erratic behavior, he warned with calculated intimidation, designed to silence opposition through fear rather than addressing legitimate concerns about his unauthorized business interference. I'll file for divorce citing mental health concerns that demonstrate your unfitness for financial responsibilities. And I'll ensure that our entire family understands how your emotional instability has threatened what should have been a joyful celebration. The sophistication of his threats revealed planning that extended far beyond impulsive damage control, suggesting systematic preparation for destroying my credibility, while positioning himself as the reasonable partner, protecting family harmony from my supposed psychological problems. His willingness to weaponize mental health accusations to silence legitimate business concerns demonstrated moral corruption that made reconciliation impossible, while confirming that full-scale strategic response was not only justified, but necessary for protecting corporate interests and personal integrity from ongoing assault. But as I stood in our kitchen, listening to threats designed to destroy my reputation, while protecting his theft of family celebrations and unauthorized interference with business operations, something fundamental shifted in my understanding of power, patience, and the cost of accommodation that enables systematic abuse by those who mistake quiet strength for exploitable weakness. The battle lines had been drawn with clarity that made further compromise not only impossible, but strategically inadvisable. Robert had revealed the full scope of his manipulation while demonstrating complete disregard for legal boundaries, business ethics, and basic human decency that characterized relationships built on mutual respect rather than hierarchical exploitation. The quiet woman who had funded his comfortable lifestyle while accepting dismissive treatment was about to demonstrate why underestimating someone who owns the entire game board represents tactical error of unprecedented magnitude. The war for accountability had begun, and retreat was no longer an option for anyone who had chosen to participate in systematic betrayal of someone whose true capabilities extended far beyond their comprehension or preparation for the consequences that inevitably follow such monumental miscalculation. Sunday morning arrived with crystalline clarity about the strategic response required to address Robert's systematic manipulation and protect corporate interests from ongoing unauthorized interference. The weekend had provided thinking space to process the full scope of his betrayal, while recognizing capabilities I possessed, but had never exercised with focused intention. Years of building Grandview Holdings LLC through careful acquisition and strategic expansion had inadvertently prepared me for exactly this type of warfare, though domestic applications had never seemed necessary, until my own family decided to treat me as expendable while demanding access to resources they simultaneously dismissed and coveted. My home office transformation into a war room began at dawn as I assembled documentation that would support comprehensive counterattack against those who had mistaken quiet strength for exploitable weakness. Corporate files revealed the true scope of assets Robert had attempted to manipulate without understanding their interconnected nature or my authority over systems he had never bothered to investigate. Financial records documented 17 different properties and subsidiary companies that answered ultimately to my decisions, creating leverage that extended far beyond single-venue cancellation into complete market domination throughout Arizona's luxury hospitality sector. The first phone call of my strategic campaign reached Daniel Rodriguez at 6:30 a.m., early enough to demonstrate urgent priority while respecting his professional schedule. His immediate availability suggested he had been anticipating contact from corporate leadership about the coordination problems Robert's interference had created throughout the vendor network. The respect in his voice carried familiar deference that I now recognized as appropriate acknowledgement of authority relationships that had existed for years without my conscious recognition of their significance. Victoria, Thank God you called, Daniel said with relief. That revealed how significantly Robert's unauthorized demands had disrupted operational procedures throughout the resort network. We've received additional contact from your husband, claiming authority to cancel existing arrangements and demanding immediate refunds of deposits that our contracts specify are non refundable under current circumstances. His frustration with Robert's continued manipulation was evident, though professional courtesy prevented him from directly criticizing someone he believed to be my spouse and potential corporate representative. The escalation in Robert's demands revealed desperation that suggested awareness his initial manipulation was failing to achieve desired control over wedding arrangements and family dynamics. His attempt to recover financial deposits through fraudulent contract claims represented potential criminal activity that extended beyond family conflict into business interference, requiring legal documentation and strategic response. Daniel's concerns about proper authorization procedures provided opportunity to establish clear corporate policies that would prevent future unauthorized interference while protecting business interests from systematic manipulation. Daniel, I need you to understand something clearly about authorization procedures and decision-making authority regarding all Grandview Holdings properties and subsidiary operations. I began with executive authority that had been absent from our previous conversations when I believed myself merely a valued customer, rather than recognizing my role as ultimate corporate owner. No individual other than myself possesses authority to modify existing agreements, cancel services, or represent corporate interests in negotiations with clients or vendors. His immediate shift in communication tone reflected recognition of direct corporate instruction rather than customer service interaction, confirming that staff throughout my organization understood hierarchy structures I had created without fully acknowledging their significance. Years of operational decisions and strategic planning had established management systems that functioned effectively despite my modest self-perception as local event coordinator rather than regional hospitality empire builder. The systematic contact campaign that followed involved 17 separate phone calls to property managers, service coordinators, and department heads throughout Grandview Holdings LLC network. Each conversation served dual purposes, establishing clear authority structures that prevented future, unauthorized interference, while gathering intelligence about Robert's manipulation attempts across multiple properties and vendor relationships. The scope of his systematic deception exceeded my expectations, revealing coordinated effort to undermine corporate operations while positioning himself as authorized representative for decisions he had no legal authority to make. Marcus Thompson at Desert Springs Hotel reported receiving demands for immediate cancellation of accommodation reservations for Michael and Jessica's out-of-town wedding guests, despite contracts specifying 48-hour advance notice requirements for group booking modifications. Lisa Chen at Grandview Catering Services described verbal instructions to modify menu selections and service arrangements without written authorization from designated contract signatories. James Wilson at Mountain View Transportation received demands to cancel shuttle services while maintaining payment obligations for vehicles that had been specifically reserved for wedding guest convenience. The pattern was consistent across all 17 properties. Robert had contacted each vendor, claiming spousal authority while demanding immediate compliance with modifications that violated established procedures and contractual agreements. His systematic approach suggested planning that extended beyond impulsive anger into calculated campaign to demonstrate control over arrangements I had funded and coordinated. The sophistication of his manipulation revealed understanding of business operations that he had apparently developed through years of observing my corporate activities while dismissing their significance and scope. Most disturbing were reports from 3 different property managers about Robert's characterization of my mental health and decision-making capacity during his unauthorized contact attempts. According to their documentation of his verbal communications, he had described me as emotionally unstable and unable to handle business responsibilities that required rational judgment and consistent follow-through. His character assassination was designed to justify his authority claims while undermining my credibility with vendors who had provided professional services for years without any indication of instability or incompetence. The morning phone campaign concluded with conference call including Sarah Johnson, my corporate attorney, and James Wilson, the forensic accountant she recommended, for documenting potential fraud and business interference that might require legal action if Robert's manipulation continued escalating beyond family conflict. Their combined expertise in hospitality law and financial crime investigation provided strategic framework for protecting corporate interests while gathering evidence that could support criminal charges if his unauthorized activity crossed legal boundaries that warranted prosecution. Victoria, based on the pattern of unauthorized contact and misrepresentation you've described, Robert's activity constitutes potential business interference that could result in significant legal consequences, Sarah explained, with clinical precision that transformed family conflict into corporate crime, requiring systematic documentation and strategic response. His false claims of authority combined with deliberate character defamation represent actionable behavior that extends beyond marriage counseling into criminal territory if he continues attempting to damage business relationships and operational stability. James Wilson's financial analysis revealed additional, concerning patterns in corporate account activity that suggested Robert's manipulation extended beyond wedding arrangements into broader attempts to access and control business assets he had no legitimate claim to manage. Unusual inquiry patterns from financial institutions, unauthorized information requests about corporate credit facilities, and attempts to obtain account documentation through fraudulent spousal authority claims created evidence trail that supported systematic rather than impulsive interference with business operations. The sophistication of his approach suggests professional knowledge of corporate vulnerability points and financial access procedures. James continued, with growing concern about the scope of Robert's preparation for business interference that had apparently been planned for months, rather than representing spontaneous reaction to wedding coordination disputes. This level of systematic investigation and manipulation typically precedes major fraud attempts that require extensive preparation and inside knowledge of operational procedures. The conference call concluded with strategic framework for corporate protection that would demonstrate my authority while exposing Robert's manipulation to consequences that matched the severity of his actions. Sarah recommended formal documentation of all unauthorized activity while establishing clear communication procedures that would prevent future interference. James suggested forensic audit of all corporate accounts and credit facilities to identify additional manipulation attempts that might have succeeded without detection. Monday morning brought implementation of comprehensive corporate response that would demonstrate the difference between quiet authority and public dominance when circumstances required complete deployment of available resources. The executive conference room at Grandview Holdings LLC headquarters had hosted numerous strategic planning sessions and acquisition meetings, but never a family intervention requiring full corporate authority to address domestic manipulation that threatened business stability and professional relationships throughout Arizona's hospitality industry. The 45th floor executive offices provided panoramic views of downtown Phoenix that served as visual reminder of economic influence that extended far beyond single venue control into market domination that affected employment, tourism revenue, and industry standards throughout the southwestern United States. Awards and recognition certificates displayed throughout the reception area documented achievements in hospitality excellence, community leadership, and business innovation that represented years of strategic growth and professional recognition Robert had dismissed as hobby activities that supplemented household income. The formal invitation I sent to Robert, Michael, Jessica, and Patricia Hayes was delivered through corporate counsel with legal precision that transformed family meeting into business proceeding, requiring their attendance at specific time and location for resolution of matters affecting corporate operations and contractual obligations. The language was diplomatically professional, while making clear that attendance was mandatory rather than optional, and that failure to appear would result in formal legal proceedings that could prove significantly more expensive and embarrassing than voluntary participation in structured negotiation. Robert's response to the corporate summons revealed shock and growing alarm about authority he had never recognized or understood, despite benefiting from its financial results throughout our marriage. His attempted phone calls were directed to corporate reception staff, who followed instructions to refer all communication to legal counsel, creating barrier between his manipulation attempts and direct access to decision-making processes he had assumed he could influence through intimidation and character assassination. Victoria, what the hell is this corporate meeting nonsense about family wedding arrangements? Robert demanded during voice message left at Sarah Johnson's law office when corporate staff refused to provide direct access to my personal communications. I'm not playing games with lawyers and business meetings over simple family coordination that got complicated because you can't delegate responsibility without creating drama. His frustration with professional boundaries and legal procedures revealed how completely he had underestimated both my business acumen and willingness to deploy corporate resources for protecting interests he had systematically threatened. Michael and Jessica's confusion about the corporate meeting invitation was more sympathetic. Given their innocent involvement in manipulation, they had not initiated or fully understood. Their phone calls to Patricia Hayes, seeking explanation for legal summons they could not afford to ignore, revealed family dynamics that had concealed the true scope of my business activities from relatives who had accepted Robert's characterization of my work as modest event coordination rather than recognizing hospitality empire that employed hundreds of people and generated millions of dollars in annual revenue. Tuesday afternoon brought the confrontation that would reshape every family relationship and establish permanent boundaries about respect, authority, and consequences for those who chose to participate in systematic betrayal of someone whose capabilities extended far beyond their understanding. The executive boardroom had been prepared with documentation that would demonstrate not only my ownership of wedding venues and services they had attempted to manipulate, but also the broader scope of assets and influence that made their actions appear pathetically inadequate rather than strategically threatening. Robert entered the corporate offices with aggressive confidence that began dissolving the moment he encountered security procedures and professional atmosphere that characterized serious business. Rather than domestic negotiation, he had expected to dominate through familiar intimidation tactics. The marble lobby, original artwork, and obvious expense of corporate headquarters created immediate recognition that his wife's small event planning business represented far more sophisticated enterprise than he had ever bothered to investigate or acknowledge. His discomfort increased during elevator ride to the 45th floor executive level, where panoramic city views and luxury appointments demonstrated wealth and influence that challenged his assumptions about domestic hierarchy and financial control. The executive reception area displayed awards and recognition certificates, documenting business achievements that exceeded his own professional accomplishments, creating cognitive dissonance that required fundamental reassessment of marriage dynamics and power relationships he thought he understood. Michael and Jessica arrived together, their anxiety about legal proceedings they could not afford to ignore, evident in nervous conversation and careful attention to professional atmosphere that suggested serious consequences for family conflicts they had assumed could be resolved through informal discussion and compromise. Patricia Hayes followed minutes later, her disapproval of corporate formality clear, despite recognition that circumstances required respectful attention to legal procedures and business protocols she had never encountered in previous family interactions. The boardroom itself provided the perfect setting for revelations that would transform their understanding of authority, respect, and consequences for systematic manipulation by those who had mistaken generosity for weakness and quiet strength for exploitable vulnerability. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking views of Phoenix skyline that represented economic influence extending throughout Arizona's business community, while conference table and leather chairs created formal atmosphere, appropriate for corporate proceedings rather than family mediation. Thank you all for attending this meeting to address concerns about unauthorized interference with Grandview Holdings LLC operations and contractual obligations. I began with executive authority that immediately established different dynamics from any previous family interaction they could remember. Recent events have created situations requiring clarification of authority structures and implementation of policies that will prevent future business disruption while protecting corporate interests and client relationships throughout our organization. The formal language and professional setting created immediate recognition that this conversation would follow corporate protocols rather than family diplomacy, establishing boundaries that prevented emotional manipulation and character assassination tactics Robert had employed during our private confrontations. Legal documentation arranged on the conference table provided visual evidence of systematic business operations that extended far beyond single venue coordination into comprehensive hospitality empire that commanded respect throughout the industry. Robert, your recent contact with corporate properties and service providers has created significant operational disruption while violating contractual agreements and established authorization procedures. I continued with clinical precision that focused on documented behavior rather than emotional reactions to his manipulation. Your false claims of authority, combined with character defamation, represent business interference that requires immediate resolution to prevent legal consequences that could prove extremely expensive and personally damaging. His face reflected growing comprehension of how completely he had misunderstood both my business capabilities and willingness to deploy corporate resources for protecting interests he had systematically threatened. The confident aggression he had displayed during private conversations began dissolving as he processed implications of formal business setting and legal documentation that made his manipulation appear not strategically threatening, but pathetically inadequate, given the scope of resources he had challenged without understanding. Victoria, you never mentioned owning hospitality properties or managing corporate operations beyond local event planning activities, Robert said, with defensive confusion that revealed how successfully his own dismissive attitude had prevented him from recognizing obvious evidence of business empire he had lived within for years. You told me you coordinated weddings and special events through vendor relationships, not that you owned hotels and resort properties throughout multiple states. The accusation that I had concealed my business activities demonstrated his fundamental inability to accept responsibility for systematic dismissal and willful ignorance that had prevented him from acknowledging achievements he found threatening to assumptions about domestic hierarchy and financial control. Years of his casual references to my hobby business and small event coordination had reflected his desire to minimize accomplishments that challenged his self-image as primary breadwinner, rather than recognizing partnership with someone whose entrepreneurial success exceeded his own professional achievements. Robert, I have never misrepresented my business activities or corporate responsibilities, I replied, with calm authority that contrasted sharply with his growing agitation and defensive blame-shifting. Grandview Hospitality Group encompasses 17 properties and subsidiary companies, generating over $200 million in annual revenue. Event planning represents our core business model, though apparently your dismissive characterization of my work prevented you from understanding its actual scope and significance. The financial figure landed with impact that visibly shook his understanding of marriage dynamics and economic relationships that had supported comfortable lifestyle he had attributed primarily to his own banking career success. $200 million in annual revenue represented business empire that dwarfed his professional accomplishments, while revealing that his dismissive treatment of my achievements had been not only morally wrong, but laughably ignorant of economic reality surrounding our marriage. Michael and Jessica's shock was more sympathetic, given their innocent acceptance of Robert's characterization of my business as modest family support, rather than recognizing corporate empire that had made their dream wedding possible through resources they had never imagined accessible. Their confusion about family financial dynamics that had been deliberately concealed through Robert's manipulation reflected genuine surprise, rather than willful dismissal of achievements that threatened no one except his ego. Victoria, we had no idea about the scope of your business success or corporate ownership, Michael said, with growing embarrassment about accepting my funding while participating in my exclusion from celebrations I had made possible. Robert described your contributions as generous family assistance while he handled coordination responsibilities and major financial obligations. His admission of Robert's deception revealed systematic lies that had concealed my actual role in creating their wedding celebration. The systematic documentation I presented during the following hour detailed not only my ownership of every vendor and service provider involved in their wedding arrangements, but also the broader network of hospitality properties and subsidiary companies that Robert had attempted to manipulate without understanding their interconnected nature or my authority over operational decisions. Each contract, financial agreement, and corporate filing demonstrated business sophistication that rendered his manipulation attempts not threatening, but pathetically amateur, given the resources he had challenged. Sunset Ridge Resort, Desert Springs Hotel, Grandview Catering Services, Mountain View Transportation, and Artistic Wedding Photography all operate as subsidiary companies under Grandview Holdings LLC corporate umbrella. I explained with systematic precision that illustrated comprehensive ownership of every component involved in their celebration. Your wedding arrangements were planned and coordinated entirely within my corporate network, using my properties, my staff, and my financial resources, while I was simultaneously excluded from participation in events that exist only because of infrastructure I created and maintained. The irony was devastating in its completeness. They had planned their entire celebration using venues, services, and staff that answered directly to the woman they had decided was unworthy of attendance, while her funding remained essential for arrangements they could never have achieved independently. Robert's systematic exclusion of me from wedding coordination represented not strategic family leadership, but rather comprehensive ignorance of business realities that made their celebration possible. Patricia Hayes finally found her voice after processing corporate documentation that revealed how completely she had misunderstood family financial dynamics and business relationships that had existed for years without her awareness or understanding. Victoria, dear, we had no idea that your business activities were so extensive, or that our family wedding arrangements depended entirely on your corporate properties and services. Her belated recognition of my achievements carried genuine shock rather than continued dismissal, though years of participation in my marginalization could not be resolved through single acknowledgement of previously ignored reality. The time had arrived for consequences that matched the severity of systematic manipulation and character assassination that had threatened not only family relationships, but also business operations and professional reputation throughout Arizona's hospitality industry. The quiet woman they had dismissed and financially exploited was finally demonstrating why underestimating someone who controls entire market sectors represents tactical error of unprecedented magnitude. Your wedding celebration as currently planned will not proceed, I announced with corporate authority that transformed months of their planning into cancellation notice that could not be appealed or modified through family negotiation. All reservations, services, and arrangements have been terminated effective immediately due to contractual violations and business interference that make continued service relationship impossible. The silence that followed was profound and devastating as they processed implications of complete wedding cancellation just weeks before scheduled celebration that had required months of planning and coordination. Hotel reservations for 60 guests, catering arrangements for reception dinner, photography services, transportation coordination, and venue access for ceremony and reception disappeared with single corporate decision that demonstrated power they had never imagined existing within family relationships. They thought they understood, Robert's desperate attempts to salvage celebration through alternative vendor arrangements revealed how completely he had failed to understand hospitality market dynamics that made replacement services impossible to secure on short notice. Victoria. Surely we can find other venues and service providers who can accommodate Michael and Jessica's wedding with reasonable modifications to original arrangements. He pleaded, with growing panic about social embarrassment and family disappointment that would result from wedding cancellation. His naive assumptions about vendor availability demonstrated ignorance of industry relationships and resource scarcity that made last minute arrangements virtually impossible, particularly for celebrations requiring luxury services and exclusive venue access during peak wedding season. Months of advance planning and deposit payments were typically necessary for securing quality vendors, while my corporate network controlled significant portion of premium services throughout Arizona's hospitality market. Alternative arrangement feasibility depends entirely on your willingness to accept accountability for systematic manipulation and character defamation that created this situation. I replied with strategic precision that offered resolution contingent upon conditions that would restore respect and establish boundaries, preventing future betrayal. Business relationships require a foundation of trust and mutual respect that has been systematically destroyed through actions that demonstrate complete disregard for professional ethics and family loyalty. The terms I presented were designed to address both immediate wedding arrangements and broader patterns of dismissive treatment that had characterized my family relationships for years, while establishing precedent for future interactions that acknowledged rather than diminished my achievements and contributions. Financial restitution, public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and written apologies would create accountability that matched the scope of systematic betrayal while providing foundation for rebuilding relationships on basis of mutual respect rather than hierarchical exploitation. $70,000 payable within 48 hours to cover additional coordination costs, service modifications, and administrative expenses resulting from your unauthorized interference with corporate operations. I announced with business precision that transformed family conflict into commercial transaction, requiring specific performance rather than emotional negotiation. Written apologies from each family member, acknowledging inappropriate treatment and committing to respectful interaction in all future family and business relationships. The financial requirement represented nearly double the original wedding costs, while establishing precedent that actions carry consequences extending beyond emotional discomfort into economic accountability that would be remembered during future decision-making about respect and appropriate boundaries. Written apologies would create documentation of acknowledged wrongdoing that prevented future gaslighting or historical revision about events that had threatened both family relationships and business operations. Additionally, public acknowledgement during wedding reception of circumstances that nearly destroyed this celebration will ensure guests understand importance of treating family members with dignity and respect regardless of their social or economic status. I continued with requirements designed to prevent continued character assassination, while demonstrating accountability that matched public humiliation I had experienced during initial wedding planning exclusion. The comprehensive terms created pathway for celebration that could proceed under my complete authority, while establishing boundaries that protected both personal dignity and business interests from future manipulation by those who had learned to distinguish between quiet strength and exploitable weakness. The choice was theirs to make: accept accountability and proceed with modified celebration under my terms, or face complete cancellation with social embarrassment that would affect family reputation throughout their community. Robert's financial panic about $70,000 payment requirement revealed how completely he had depended on my resources while simultaneously dismissing their source and significance. His banking career provided comfortable income, but nothing approaching wealth necessary for luxury wedding arrangements he had assumed would continue being subsidized through my generosity despite his systematic betrayal of trust and respect that made such support possible. The following week transformed their modest teacher salary celebration into intimate mountain wedding that emphasized genuine relationships over social performance and superficial display of wealth they could not afford independently. 40 carefully selected guests replaced 60 acquaintances and networking contacts, creating atmosphere focused on meaningful connections rather than professional obligations and social climbing that had characterized original planning. Victoria's redesigned celebration featured natural mountain beauty that required no artificial enhancement, locally sourced cuisine that supported regional agriculture, and photography focused on emotional authenticity rather than staged luxury that impressed people whose opinions had no lasting significance. The reduced budget created more sophisticated and personally meaningful experience that emphasized commitment being celebrated rather than economic resources being displayed. During reception dinner, Michael and Jessica each offered public acknowledgement of my contributions and recognition of disrespectful treatment that had nearly destroyed their celebration through family manipulation that prioritized ego over gratitude. Their words carried genuine emotion and learning that suggested character growth rather than performed contrition, designed to satisfy requirements while maintaining internal resentment. Victoria made our dream wedding possible through generosity that extended far beyond financial support into personal investment of time, expertise, and caring that we initially failed to appreciate appropriately, Michael said, with visible emotion that reflected understanding rather than strategic damage control. Our celebration exists because of her dedication to family relationships that we temporarily forgot to honor with gratitude and respect she deserves. Jessica's acknowledgement focused on lessons learned about recognizing and valuing quiet strength that operates without seeking recognition or praise, but deserves acknowledgement when offered freely from genuine appreciation. Victoria taught us that real power whispers while insecurity shouts, and that families are strongest when they celebrate each member's contributions rather than taking generosity for granted or using it as weapon for control. The reception concluded with dancing under natural starlight that provided beauty no decorator could replicate or improve, while mountain air carried sounds of celebration that emphasized joy over display and connection over performance. The evening felt genuinely meaningful in ways their original plans could never have achieved, despite superior expense and luxury amenities that impressed strangers whose approval had no lasting value. Robert's isolation during celebration reflected family recognition of his primary responsibility for manipulation that had nearly destroyed relationships through calculated betrayal designed to demonstrate control over resources he had never created or contributed to developing. His discomfort with modified social dynamics revealed how completely he had depended on hierarchical family structures that supported his ego while diminishing achievements that threatened his self-image. But the wedding celebration represented only the visible resolution of family conflict that had revealed far more significant concerns about Robert's business activities and potential involvement in financial irregularities that extended beyond domestic manipulation into criminal territory requiring federal investigation and prosecution. The quiet woman who had emerged victorious from family warfare was about to discover that systematic betrayal had been only the surface layer of deception that concealed far more dangerous secrets. Late Sunday evening, while reviewing corporate security footage to document Robert's unauthorized visits to resort properties, I discovered surveillance recordings that revealed activities extending far beyond wedding coordination, interference into systematic criminal enterprise that had been operating within my business network without detection. Hidden cameras throughout executive conference facilities had captured meetings between Robert and individuals whose presence on corporate property had never been authorized or explained through legitimate business purposes. The recordings showed Robert providing corporate financial information, property access codes, and operational details to associates whose professional appearance concealed criminal intentions. That became apparent through conversations about money laundering operations that utilized luxury hospitality properties for concealing illegal financial transactions. My hotels and resorts had been systematically compromised by criminal network that viewed corporate assets as convenient infrastructure for international money laundering schemes that generated millions of dollars in illegal profits. Robert's investment banking career had apparently provided expertise and industry connections necessary for sophisticated financial crimes that required professional knowledge of regulatory systems and legitimate business operations that could conceal criminal activity from federal oversight and investigation. His dismissive treatment of my business achievements had masked systematic exploitation of corporate resources for criminal enterprises that threatened not only my professional reputation, but also personal freedom if authorities discovered unauthorized activity within properties registered under my ownership. The scope of criminal activity revealed through surveillance footage exceeded anything I had imagined during months of recognizing Robert's manipulative behavior and character assassination that had threatened family relationships and wedding arrangements. Money laundering, fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering charges could result in federal prosecution that would destroy both business empire and personal life, regardless of my innocent ignorance about criminal activity that had been conducted using my corporate infrastructure without authorization or knowledge. Tuesday morning brought phone call that confirmed my worst fears about federal investigation that had been monitoring criminal activity within my corporate network for months without my awareness or understanding of suspicious transactions that had triggered regulatory oversight and law enforcement scrutiny. Special Agent Lisa Thompson from FBI Financial Crimes Unit requested immediate meeting to discuss cooperation with ongoing investigation that could provide protection from prosecution in exchange for assistance with documenting criminal enterprise that had compromised my business operations. Mrs. Hayes, we've been investigating money laundering activities that involve properties registered under Grandview Holdings LLC ownership, Agent Thompson explained, with professional courtesy that barely concealed urgency about criminal prosecution that could result from continued ignorance about illegal activity within corporate network. Your cooperation with our investigation could provide immunity from prosecution while helping us document criminal enterprise that has been operating within hospitality industry for over 2 years. The wedding betrayal had been only the beginning of discoveries about the man I married and the scope of deception that had surrounded our entire relationship while concealing criminal activity that threatened not only personal freedom, but also business empire. I had spent years building through legitimate entrepreneurship and strategic planning. The quiet woman who had emerged victorious from family warfare was about to enter far more dangerous battle against criminal enterprise that would determine whether justice prevailed over systematic corruption that had infected every aspect of life I thought I understood. The true war was just beginning, and victory would require resources and strategic thinking that extended far beyond family dynamics into federal criminal investigation that would reshape everything I believed about marriage, trust, and the price of discovering that the person sleeping beside you every night had been systematically destroying everything you worked to build while you remained focused on domestic harmony, rather than recognizing predator who had been hunting within your own home.